Okay, so now we're going to get to John's book, which is Johnny Hardly Knew Ya, which we think the title's probably wrong, but everybody voted against your title, John.
Yeah.
But
why is that? Why is that?
Well,
It doesn't say. It doesn't.
it's an Irish song. It's about JFK now. I mean, people always use that. There's a book titled Johnny Hardly Knew Ya about JFK.
Well,
So-
why I chose that was because I was trying to say that in this part of my life I hardly knew myself.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's obvious.
Okay,
That was obvious.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
No, it's a good sentence, but it's not a good title.
Okay, all right. Let me see. This new title is "How I Quit Smoking."
No, it would be Fat Mama, I think. Let's go back to what my conversation with Rafael originally, when he handed me this big doorstop of a book, and he said, I think you might find this interesting. And when you read it, what were your impressions? Because I did find it very interesting.
Me too. Except I knew I was going to appear in it, so I was looking for Pancho.
Which I should have done.
Okay, but it's...
So what is it, Miguel?
In the third edition,
Miguel.
it will be Pancho, depending on what you say.
Yeah. The star of the book is really your mother, and you met her.
Yeah.
And your mother is an amazing character in this book. I mean, really, my wife read the book, same thing. She looked at the first 30 pages and she thought, this is too big, I'm not going to read it. She said then she sat there the whole night and read the next day and the next day until she finished it. So there's something amazing about this book. It really is incredible. And I'm so glad that Rafael introduced it to me in the beginning. But tell me about, you met John's mother. Tell me about what she looked like and your impressions of her as a person. The real mother.
Powerful. Powerful. You don't fuck around with her.
And very heavy.
Yeah, and I remember you commenting to me at some point later that the only other person that you knew like her was your father. That's what the only we had in common. We had these powerful people that you didn't fuck around with.
But not the same. I mean, come on, your mother was a monster.
Well, but I mean, power it's like generals. There's just the dark side and the bright side.
The A type. What were your
But you know
impressions?
what happened with my father, for example, at home? The children belonged to the mother. So, Papa, I want to go ask your mother. So I didn't have to deal with my father. And then sometimes if I wanted something from my father, I would send my mother.
Oh,
So that's why. So he was a general, but he wasn't an active general.
So you were lucky
Because the children belonged to the mother.
So you don't have any bad feelings towards him then?
The worst part with my father was if you stayed at home and didn't go out, you had no problems with him. Little things, what time do we have, but where it was from the age that I started dating, maybe 14, 15 to 20 or whatever, he wouldn't let me leave the house. And so I have a date, but okay, I'll be back at 9. 9? The party starts at 10. I go, what do you mean? No. Otherwise you can't go out. And that lasted until the last time my brother and I were there, in which there was a party. I don't know if it was a New Year's Eve party at the house of my father's best friend, Luis Alcoriza, that was a co-writer, and he lived 15 minutes away from our house. And my brother and I were going to go, and I knew Mexico 10 times better than my father, because my father never went out. And he said, okay, it's very dangerous. I know the city. Okay, you're back at 10. This is a New Year's Eve party. 10? It doesn't start until 11. And my brother and I were down visiting, and I said, okay, if you want to, I won't go. I come here once a year to see you. I'll stay. I don't have to go. But before, when I was young, I was the rebel. I was like, and I yell and cry and kick, and I have to go out. The girl's waiting for me. And this time, my brother got mad. No, I'm coming back at 12. Now at 10 I lock the door so you can't get in, and and then finally I'll come back whenever I won't go, you know. So that we go to the party. My brother sleeps over at the friend's house, and I come back at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then with my mother. Mama, okay, what time is it? 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, well, my father used to go to bed at 9 o'clock. So, what time shall we tell him you got back? Oh, around 10:30. Okay.
That's wonderful.
Well, you know, I always knew that I always knew that I couldn't go to my father for anything. That his vote didn't count.
Well, let's get into that, but I want you to compare mothers. Compare your mother to his mother.
Yeah, no, like I told, well, Granger, so you know, that probably one of the nicest women I ever met was my mother. I mean, I was lucky. She was just...
You were lucky.
Yeah, no, so super. Because, you know, I had friends in Mexico City also. And one of my best friends there, the mother was just horrendous. And, you know, so I think of all the mothers I met in I guess mothers that I met in Mexico. The nicest one was my mother. She was just, you know, really, really nice. I was lucky to have such a nice mother.
Okay, so we're going to get to your mother, and you met her, and she, as you said, she was formidable and scary and very fat.
Yeah.
I want to get into the fat part because this is a book about fat people. It's about fatness. It's ironical. It's sympathetic. It's really brilliant. Fat mama, that would be, except fat mother. I mean, you know, maybe that would be the way to go. But you were born in Pasadena in 1943, right?
Right.
And you lived on the east side.
Correct.
Okay, and you had a mother and a father and 3 siblings.
Right.
2 sisters and a brother.
Correct.
Right? And all of the children in the family were very fat. In fact, one of the funniest scenes, but it's also, you know, sad, is the one where you all go to the doctor and he weighs you on the scale and you can't tell what the weight is because the needle goes all the way over to the highest point on the scale, so he writes down that number, but that wasn't the number. Like 250-pound children.
Yeah, he was a convenient doctor, a dispenser of the speed, really, legal speed at the time, and his scale only went to 250 pounds, and so we all lined up, and I don't know that any one of us were as thin as 250 pounds. Certainly not my mother, and not myself or my older sister. And the doctor would go, and he would, after he'd weigh each one of us, he would announce the weight to his nurse and say, "John Prince, 250 pounds." And then he would put the scale back up on top of the shelf, and then he would have the next person come, and he'd take this, do it all over again. And then when we got outside, my mother would bargain for the maximum number of pills because she didn't want to pay any money. She wanted to come back too often, and she would get a prescription of like 500 pills. I mean, an incredible number of, it would kill anybody. And then she would go to a pharmacy where if she paid enough money, she might be able to double that prescription. And then she would go home and she would get a mayonnaise jar and she would pour all these pills in the mayonnaise jar, and then she'd warn us not to sneak these pills, which of course everybody did. Anyway, that was the extent of our dieting.
It's a fascinating book. It takes place in Pasadena. I think this probably is the best novel ever written about Pasadena. All the novels about Pasadena are written about the rich side of Pasadena. This takes place on the poor side. Can you tell us which side was which?
Well, as well as I know the history of Pasadena, there was Orange Grove Boulevard was where the wealthy were at the turn of the century, and they had a lot of black servants. And then at the time of the Depression, when a lot of Caucasians lost their jobs. A lot of Caucasians became the servants too, including my mother. She was a servant in one of those great houses, and it ended up by the late 30s and the 40s that the far west side of town was entirely black, and most of the middle and the east side of town was white. The white part considered themselves middle class, but in reality we were just lower middle class, blue collar people.
And you lived
There were no professions.
You lived at Fair Oaks and Mountain.
And that was where the store was.
Okay.
That was the black part.
And your store, your parents, your father, by the way, was not fat.
He was not fat.
No. And your father was of Italian descent.
He was.
Interesting part of the story at the very end. We get back to this.
Right.
In the store, my friend Nick Goodhue, whose grandfather built Caltech, Bertram Goodhue, built the LA Public Library, lived on the rich side of Pasadena. I asked him to read this book, and he hasn't gotten back to me yet, but I'm interested to know what he thinks he remembers your store, and he thinks he remembers your mother. So can you tell me...
Oh my.
Yeah. Tell me about the store. When you were a little boy there, and tell me about the empty bottles.
Well, you know, the store was the center of the family. Even though we lived many miles away, the whole family came to the store each day because that's where my parents earned their living, and the whole family worked there. My sisters ran the cash register, my father was the butcher, and my mother ran the show. And my brother and I, who were very little, my brother probably was 5 or 6, and I was probably 8 or so when we started out there, amongst our duties was the bottles. We would have to, the people would come in, and the bottles are worth 1 cent, 2 cent, 5
They
cent.
called them the empties.
The empties. And the empties would be under the cash register, and they would end up in a huge cardboard box, and we would have to drag this box all the way through the store back to a chicken wired screened room in the back dirt lot. And this chicken wire area was locked, and it was probably 10 feet tall. And the boxes we had to separate the bottles into different companies' boxes. The reason that the walls were so high was because my mother was always sure that the blacks would steal the bottles. That was one of her major paranoia, and she often had derogatory, racist little signs that she would hang outside the door of the thing, and the door of the little storeroom. It didn't matter in those days. If there was a problem between white people and black people in those days, and the police got called, the police always sided on the side of the whites.
Mm-hmm. And tell me the story. It was your job to catch people stealing things from the store. There's a wonderful chapter.
My mother was sure this one dapper little black gentleman was stealing beer. She didn't know how he was stealing it, but she knew the beer was missing. These were the days before there was electronic inventory, but she knew. And she said, the only way we're going to catch him is I'm going to have to put one of you kids in the cooler, and you're going to have to wait when he comes in. And she selected me, and I can always remember thinking to myself at the time, why not my brother? He's the useless one. He's the one that isn't going to do anything in his life. Put him in there. But she stuck me in there. And I remember waiting, and there he came, and first he looked in the, I got behind the furthest door I could because I didn't want him to really see me, and he opened that door first, but he didn't see me. And then he went to the beer door, and in those days they sold a lot of these little tiny cans. This was Country Club,
malt liquor.
Yeah, he opened the door, and I thought to myself, well, what's going to happen? And then quick as a blink of the eye, he doffed a little bowler hat, grabbed that little ball can, put it on his head, and put the cap back on, and started out of the store. And then I came along behind him, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to confront an adult. I was a little kid, and my mother was waiting at the entrance, waiting for me to do something. And I came along and I just speechless. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't do anything, you know. And finally, she blocked his path. And she looked at me and she said, "What? Where is the beer? What has he done?" She said, you know, she really put me on the spot. And I didn't quite know. I thought, save me, save me, save me. And finally, she said, "Take your hat off." And he hesitated a moment. And just like that, and he was practically a magician, he swooped his hat off with the beer in it and brought it down his pant leg. And for an instant, the beer held. I thought, I'm saved. And then the can rolled out on the concrete floor. And he ran out of the store. And my mother, at that point, I was a criminal.
Another struggle that was
You
going.
were a criminal?
I was a criminal because I hadn't caught him. Yeah.
But you didn't tell the police.
No.
So you were abetting.
Yeah, I was aiding and abetting this person.
One chapter I think that is one of the most powerful in the whole book is the one about you in the locker room. You were a fat kid, and actually there weren't a lot of fat kids in Pasadena at that time, according to what you said.
Actually, I don't think there were a lot of fat kids at the time. There was a few fat black kids, but there weren't very many fat white kids. You know, we hadn't reached the point that we had today. In fact, as I remember my school growing up, I was the only kid that was anything like really overweight, obese, and up until the 7th grade. In the 7th grade, you finally get the gymnasium. You're finally going to have to go in the locker room. You're going to have to take off your clothes, go take a shower. Of course, I dreaded this because I knew I was like a human dirigible, and I managed to make it as far as the shower before the torment started, and the couple of three of whoever they were came over, started to tease me. I got my face, my body to the wall. You know, they're just like little tormenting male species are going to do. They stood around, they started to urinate on me, and at that point I rushed out of the shower with one of them in hot pursuit, and I tripped and fell, splat on the thing, and the lead guy caught up with me, and he stood over me, still pissing on me. And at that instant, you know, don't ask me how you protect yourself. I reached up and I grabbed onto his dick and pulled myself up, which ended the whole thing on the spot for the moment. Except now I got every little male chauvinist pig in the place chasing me back to my locker. I'm in the corner. They all got their wet towels. They're actually attacking me. And the only thing that saved me was the coach coming over and seeing all these, is like they were trying to kill someone. I think they were trying to kill me. I was anathema. And the coach pulled them off one by one until he finally got down to me. And he didn't like me either. You know, because you know I was just a non-conforming human being. But he stopped the whole thing.
I thought another really interesting chapter was your black friend. Your only friend was a little black kid, and you said you were kind of proud of yourself that you had this friend, because you were like he was, in the sense that black kids in Pasadena had a very hard time. They were on the wrong side of the track, and you were a fat kid, a black kid and a fat kid.
Yeah, I like that.
It was beautiful.
Yeah. They never made fun of me.
Yeah.
Huh?
They never made fun of me.
But tell me about him. Do you wonder where he is today? Or?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
You know, they were a minority and I was a minority. And when I was with those kids, especially this one kid who lived practically right next door, I felt really comfortable. I mean, they never looked at me. They never made remarks. I think they were glad that they had a friend that was white. You know,
They saw you as a white guy, not as a fat guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the especially this one kid, that one of the saddest moment of my life was when the store was being sold and we were getting ready to leave, and I knew I was never going to come back again, and my mother was going to collect on the credit card accounts, and she grabbed my brother and I and she said, we're going to go collect these accounts. You boys are going to find out how business are done. And she drug us over into his house, and his little old grandmother was there, and she was in a rocking chair, and my mother pushed her way in, and my friend was halfway hidden behind the couch, and my mother demanded whatever the amount of money was.
It's one of the greatest scenes in the whole book.
Yeah, and the woman said,
Beautiful.
Miss Prince, I only got this much money in my Social Security, and there ain't no use taking this money because I'm gonna have to come back for credit anyway. I gotta feed myself. I gotta feed my grandson here, and my mother reached over and grabbed the money out of her hand and took off and said, "Come on, boys, the business is done."
Yeah.
And I know as we rushed out the door, I saw my black fin for the last time. I guess maybe that was the end of the black-white divide.
It's very moving because you go back to Pasadena now, you find a black mayor, a black police chief.
Yeah,
Things have changed considerably, and they've gotten better. That kind of thinking is just not permitted. Well, it still goes on, unfortunately, but I think publicly it's not permitted.
Well, we're a couple of generations away from the 50s.
Yeah. It's true. Well, you still see, I'll tell you, even the divides in this city, there are still racial problems. But Pasadena, I think, is quite remarkable with what it's done.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there was a lot of blacks there.
I worked at the LA Times when they had one black reporter.
And
that was during the
and how many white reporters?
Everybody else.
How many?
Oh, 100.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Right, one woman too. Okay, so another thing that's very interesting is your religion, because your father was actually raised Catholic, but he wasn't practicing.
Right.
He was a lapsed Catholic. And your mother was what I would call a zany Protestant. She was into some rather crazy things. Can you tell us the story of the 30 pieces of silver?
Well, my mother, they stopped going to church regularly once they had the business, and then of course after the store was sold, she bought another business, and during that period, we kids were made to go to church, but she and my father only went on the important holidays, and one of those holidays I remember was Easter, and I remember we were in a church, I think it was a Southern Baptist church, and the minister was going on and on about how Jesus was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, and that the least any of you could do out there is put $30. If you have silver dollars, that's even better when the tray comes through. And my father was truly moved by this. My father was a gentle man. That was one of his problems, he was too gentle. And so when the basket came along, he put the $30 in there, and the basket moved right by us. When it got to my mother, she took the $30 out, which was to be expected. And that was one extreme thing. But I can remember a number of times, the few times we went out to restaurants, she always picked up the tip that he put down on the table. She always took the tip.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, in high school, things began to turn around for you. In fact, you did go on a really, really serious diet, and you lost about 1/3 of your weight. You want to tell me about that?
That was the moment of not only trying to socially integrate myself for the first time, but it was the moment of rebellion against my mother. My mother couldn't deal with any of us not being fat, and she wouldn't say that. She always said this was a terrible thing that happened to us. We've got it by genes, by heredity. You have no choice. You'll always be overweight. You'll always be obese. And then the day came. It was actually in junior high, in the summer of the 9th grade. I decided that I was going to go on a diet and lose weight. I didn't know what a diet was. Nobody knew what a diet was, but I kept a journal. And I thought, well, if I cut down what I eat, if I cut it to the bare minimum, to the point where I know I'm hungry most of the time, I got to lose weight, and that's a true fact. So the day came when I decided to do it, and she called me to the dinner table, and I matter-of-factly said, I'm not going to eat dinner, I'm on a diet. And that was a point of rebellion to her. She couldn't deal with that. She said, no, you will eat, you will eat. If you eat what I tell you to eat, you don't need more, you won't have a weight problem. Well, I don't know how she could say that. She was 300 and some pounds, and I was 275 or whatever it was. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then the conversation just quickly led to the point of, you don't love me. If you don't eat that food, you don't love me. So there was a divide and a conflict right there. And the next thing you know, my mother was weeping, and I'm out of the room. So it was a hard way to start a diet. But I stayed with it, and by the end of the summer, I had indeed lost about a third of my weight, and I remember to the point where my clothes no longer fit. I would have to take my blue jeans, and I had to keep putting holes in my belt and cinching them tighter and tighter and tighter. It was ridiculous. I looked like one of those Civil War New York.
Or a scarecrow.
Yeah, exactly. and my shirt hung on me. And finally, at the end, I told my mom, I said, school's going to start in a couple of days. I have to have some new clothes. No, you're not going to have any new clothes because you're going to get fat again, and you're going to grow right back into these clothes, which she turned out to be right. So I'm not going to buy any new clothes. Finally, my sister,
Your older sister.
not the oldest, the next to the oldest, said to Mom, she says, I have some money, I'll take him shopping. And my mother relented. She says, okay, but one pair of pants and 2 shirts is all. Mm-hmm. So, and then my sister drove me to school that day, and it was John Marshall Junior High, and his long set of marble steps going up to the entrance, very classic architecture. And I remember being a little reluctant to get out of the car. I was kind of nervous. And my sister said, go ahead, you're going to do fine. And so I remember walking up the steps, and the couple of kids would come up to me and they say, who are you? You must be a new student. They didn't know who I was.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And then I said, I'm so-and-so and so-and-so. And the next thing you know, there was a crowd of kids around me. It's so-and-so. It's so-and-so. Can you believe this? Can you believe this? Are you sick? Is something wrong with you? And then for the next...
the kid we used to piss on.
Yeah, and then for the next maybe a week or 2 weeks, I was on top of I was walking on a cloud. Mm-hmm. But I hadn't really solved the underlying issue, and I was still living with the general. Mm-hmm. And
your mother was a trained actress.
She was, and truly, I wasn't ready to stop being fat. Mm-hmm. So I ate it all back on again.
Your grades, however, began to really improve. Your grades began to improve.
My grades?
Yes, in school.
No, I actually always got good grades.
Okay. Tell me about that.
I was, I was smart in a flash in the pan kind of way. In other words, if you gave me a list of words to memorize, I could do that. But if you gave me 2 lists and I had to cross them back and forth, and it was going to take me a couple days to figure that out, I didn't want to do that.
So good memory, not so good in abstract thinking.
Lazy.
Yeah.
Lazy is the word. So when I got to more complicated subjects like, say, geometry, I didn't do so well.
Let's say geometry.
Or Spanish 3. And we moved
Tell us what happened with geometry.
Memorizing words to the subjunctive. I didn't do so well. And when the first bad grades came home, my mother simply didn't accept that. It couldn't be my fault. It had to be the school's fault and the teacher's fault. And she thundered her way down to the campus, to the principal's office, and my mother was a trained actress, and she could throw her voice to the balcony. She was trained at the Pasadena Playhouse. She was good, and she was able to.
So she did plays. Did she do plays?
She did some plays.
Yeah.
She was. She was. You know,
She could have been in one of your plays.
She was
Mother.
able to, she was able to recite Chaucer up to 300 lines, you know, and do it well with a good accent. And the pencil tie, coat and tie principal that she met up was no match for this woman 2 inches from her nose, saying that you're doing this because he's fat. I want him out of there, and I want these grades changed. They rolled over.
It's a great chapter in the book too.
They did it. They did it.
Yeah.
It didn't do me any good.
Well,
I mean,
it
they should
did.
have squelched me on the spot. You know?
It did in a sense, because it later led you to qualify for an honors program at UCLA.
Yeah, which I never should have been allowed to be in. I never should have been
And tell
allowed.
us what happened with that.
Well, I was like one of 100 or 200 kids that were in the entrance class that honors and entrance, blah blah blah. We got lots of extra things. You know,
They gave you a scholarship?
I'm sure the 100 kids are all professors and have invented things, and you know, and within a couple of months they're calling me back, and the woman says, "This has never happened before. You know, you're failing.
You were on probation as an
You're
honors
failing.
student.
You're on probation.
Yeah.
You know, you've gone from straight A's to F's." Yeah. Well, I'm not doing as well as I thought. You know, and I no longer had my mother to protect me.
And then two things happened.
Yeah, they gave me some things that for her to sign, and I forged her name. That's what happened. I started to learn my future real estate career. When in doubt, use forgery.
and you did real estate for how long?
For 35 years.
Yeah. Okay, one thing did happen that was very important, though. You did go on to a diet that finally led to your not having to be overweight. You haven't been overweight since.
Well,
It was like a starvation. It kind of reminds me of Gandhi and Dexamil.
between my first year in college and my second year, when I was in the fraternity and everybody went home and I stayed there for the summer and didn't go home and used the pretext of summer school, and there might have been a couple of guys in the fraternity house. You went back to Mexico, I think, and I did. I went on what was clearly a determined starvation diet.
I think, in parentheses, I think when I first met you, one of the things you told me is, "Oh, I've just lost 100 pounds." I remember 100 as.
It probably was 100.
100 yeah, but okay, good for you. You know, I didn't care. You're not a girl, and you know, so. But I remember the 100, 100 pounds.
It was the point where I remember getting down to one tiny little meal a day. I'm going to just going to throw out and say maybe 300 calories a day. Mm-hmm. But you know, I was basically a fat person inside, and I didn't, even though my stomach shrank, my mind for food never shrank. You know, I dreamed about food. There was no sex, nothing. I dreamed about food. I wanted food, and of course, when I had that such a small amount of calories in me, I was constantly falling over. You know, I tripped and fell a number of times. I had trouble staying awake, trouble focusing. I basically was starving to death, mm-hmm. and you know, no one. None of my relatives came, nothing. So I had this period of time. I think I would say that weight came off over a maximum of maybe 3 months. So I was probably losing at least a pound a day. And you know, it was a transformation all over again.
Okay, now I'm going to take you into the last part of the story, which is only one question. It's about your father. And it's about your trip to Italy. You graduated from UCLA in 3.5 years, or 3 years, I think.
3.5.
Yeah. Then you got out. You went to New York. You went to Paris. But eventually, you came to Italy, and that I think is a fascinating story because it does deal with a father that you really loved and respected, and you felt very sorry for.
I did.
And how he died is not in the book.
Right. I always felt that, from the time I was in New York and I had all the problems of being robbed and arrested, I always felt there was a reason that this was happening. And I began to have this dream that I had to go back to find where I was from in Sicily. I didn't even know where that was. I knew the name of the town. I didn't know where that town was. I hadn't been in touch with those people because, every time my grandfather would send gifts to the house, every Christmas, my mother wouldn't pay the postage on.
Oh,
it was sad,
So
and or she'd get mad if my father was going to try to make any contact with his father. And then so I had so many problems finding. I left New York with the idea that I would settle in Paris, and that I would eventually, maybe I would make a trip to down into Italy. But Paris didn't work out, and I immediately found myself on the train to Italy, and when I got into Sicily, and I went all the way to Palermo. I had no idea where this town was, and I asked, and they said, no, you have to go back, and there's not really a train station there, it's just a platform with a sign, and the train doesn't stop very long. So I went back, and sure enough, there was a sign, Alta Villa Milice, and the train was stopped just long enough to let some school kids get off, and it was already starting up as I'm at the door, and I'm hesitating, but I got off. And that was a fateful moment for me. And the town was up on a hill in the distance, and I took my duffel bag and went up the hill, and not knowing what to expect, a place that no American tourist would ever go there. Maybe they might stay, but then not. And there was a sleepy town, and I came up on this.
You didn't speak Italian, did you?
No. I had studied French. I told you what happened. You read in the French, they Alliance Française, they sent me off to a kids' school because my French was that bad. I should have listened to you in the first place. Your French is no good, your Spanish is no good. But I walked into a bar. It's the only place in town. There was a bunch of old men standing around outside. They're my age now, but they looked
our age.
Yeah, really old at the time, And,
all of us.
And I walked in there, and there's just never any chairs in an Italian bar, just a couple of game tables, and everyone stands at the bar. And of course, everything came to a dead halt. I mean, here I walk in. I got a beard. I'm wearing a long trench coat. Later, they told me they thought I was German. And I walked over there, and I had managed to write out on a little piece of paper. Somehow I figured out how to translate in Italian. My name is so and so, and I used my father's Italian name, and
which was
Lombardo. I said, my name is Giovanni Lombardo, and I walked over to the bartender, and I read this. I read this in Italian. I don't even remember what it is now. And all of a sudden, the place erupted. People got up and they came over and they started talking to me in Italian. And people started shaking my hand and patting me on the back of the head. And then I had nothing. I said, I'm looking for my grandfather. And then they were saying that I didn't understand. But the next thing I know, the bar is crowded, and to the point where everybody's buying me drinks, which I liked, and within a period of time, they want me to go outside. I go outside, and there's a little old woman there dressed in black, and a couple of younger women with her, and they made me understand that this was my aunt, and these were my cousins, We were going to go see my grandfather, and it was a wonderful experience.
Oh,
Okay, well that really does it. Do you want to make a final comment, Rafael, about what we did today? Or
go out and buy the book.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Okay, so we're finished. That's perfect.